The New Testament lesson for this morning comes from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, and verses 19 through 21. This is in part of what's called the Sermon on the Mount, or the Mountain Sermon, that begins with chapter 5 and goes through chapter 7, where Jesus says a lot of hard, radical stuff. He just really comes right at everyone. You might want to go back and read the Mountain Sermon, chapters 5 through 7 sometime, and just see all that Jesus says here. This is kind of in the middle, and it's related to giving of alms and related to what we do with our treasures. So listen now for the Word of God. Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. That's a really hard word. I think I'm going to read that one more time. Listen to it. Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Verses 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. The play being done at Virginia Sanford Theater, the next performance is called You Can't Take It With You by George Kaufman, a famous old play. That's basically what these verses are saying. And then there's the last verse here that most people reverse. Most people get this wrong. Listen carefully to what Jesus says. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Most people misquote that, thinking Jesus said, where your heart is, your treasure will be also. But that's not what he said. He says, for where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The American Heart Association tells us all to eat better, exercise more, quit smoking, get rid of all those things that hurt our hearts, because we want to have heart-healthy living. I want to translate that this morning into the title and the theme of the sermon today, which is heart-healthy giving. Now, I want to make a confession. I want to admit to you this morning that I really don't like giving stewardship sermons. And my guess is you don't really like hearing them very much. In fact, if you're a visitor today, you're probably looking, oh boy, what a Sunday where's the door? I got to get out of here. And I'm really glad that because I'm retiring next summer, this will be the last stewardship sermon I ever give. That's a great thing. The first one I ever gave here at IPC was back in the 1980s. That's right, long before I ever came here as pastor. It was up in Great Hall at a big banquet somewhere in the 1980s. And Scott McClure had invited me to come flying in. He must have been getting tired of doing stewardship sermons too. And he was bringing all these different preachers and different people in year after year. And all I really remember is that I followed a Mark Twain impersonator. I think it was Ed Miller, probably, and he did a much better job raising money than I did that year. But I don't remember what I said. I can't remember what the theme was. But the theme this morning is heart-healthy giving, which is really pretty much the theme that Jesus offers in these texts, and also the prophet Micah, if you go back and look at that famous text in Micah 6 through 8. 3 points emerge as we look at these texts, and the first one goes like this: we have to give in order to live. That's the only way we can live, is because we give. And we need to think about the physical heart just for a moment. The whole mission and purpose of the heart is to receive blood and then give it back so the body can function and live. And if the body doesn't receive the blood from the heart, then the body will die. If the heart stops beating or holds back the blood, the body can't go on. Now, what stops the heart from beating? Well, there's a similarity between the physical heart and the spiritual heart in this case. What stops the spiritual heart from giving is a spiritual hardening of the arteries, a kind of cholesterol of the soul. Let me give you another one: cirrhosis of the giver. You like that one? That's a different body part, of course, so we got to stay with the heart. A spiritual hardening of the arteries makes us hard and brittle and selfish and stingy and into ourselves. Buttrick says that the miser is hard, like his coins. Remember Jack Benny? Oh, well, not everybody here remembers Jack Benny. If you're as old and chronologically mature as I am, you do. And he was very stingy, and he loved doing jokes about it. He told about the guy who stuck a gun in his face and said, "Your money or your life." And Benny says, "Don't rush me, I'm thinking about it." You see, when we are hard and drawn into ourselves, it's hard to reach for the checkbook and write a gift to a charity, the church, or a college, or any institution. It's just hard to do it, but we have to do it in order to live spiritually. Think about breathing for a moment. Do you remember the first time you tried to hold your breath? You remember what that was like when you were a child and you were learning how to swim and you had to go underwater? You had to hold your breath and see how long you could hold it? Wonder how long you went. I think that's what people who never give do. They're just holding their financial breath. And you know what you end up when you do? You end up with spiritual halitosis. And no one wants to be around you because of that. You need to open up. And there is, you see, an inhaling and an exhaling. You can't just hold it in forever. So we inhale the grace of God in worship, in prayer, in Bible study, and in spiritual growth. But we also need to exhale the love of God in service and giving. So what some of us need is a kind of spiritual bypass, you know? We need to kind of get opened up and let it flow again, because to live, you have to give. And when you give, you actually feel better about it. I remember a church I served where we had a big soup kitchen serving 600 every day, the homeless, the very bottom of the barrel. And I remember days when I would get stuck on a sermon in my beautiful office, and I just needed to get over and be with the homeless. And all of a sudden it would open up what I needed to say to the congregation. And the way I did it was, I never sat behind or stood behind the counter and served food. I went around with pitchers. I had a pitcher of water and a pitcher of milk, and they were really heavy. And I would walk around and I'd say, "Come on, guys, lighten my load, lighten my load. My wrist hurts." And the more I gave away, the better I felt. So the first point is, we have to give in order to live fully. The second point is, we need to give with the right motive. Now, starting out with a sense of duty is not a bad way to give. Tithing, 10%. In the ancient Israel and in the time of Jesus, a tithe was like a temple tax, and people gave because they were required to do it. It's not a bad place to start. After all, Jesus is very wise about this. He says, where your treasure is, your heart will be also, show me your money and I'll show you where your heart is. Show me your checkbook and I'll show you where your heart really is. You buy those football tickets, you're going to be there to see the games, or concert tickets, you're going to go there to hear the music. Where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And the more you give to the church, the more you're going to want to be here, see what's going on with your money. Your heart follows your treasure. So it's not a bad thing to give from a sense of duty to start with, but you should never give thinking you're going to have prestige out of it. That was a problem in Jesus' day. People would blow their own horns about all the big gifts they gave, trumpets. And Jesus said, your gifts should be done in secret. So nobody knows but God. Now that's the way we do it here at IPC. No one knows what you give, except maybe a couple of people in the staff who work only in finance. I don't know. I have no idea what anybody gives or whether anybody gives or the amount or anything. Because I want to treat everybody the same. I don't want to say, well, you're a big giver. I'm going to come visit you in the hospital. Oh, you don't give anything. No hospital visit. Or no gifts from you. No baptisms or weddings for your children. No funerals for your mama or daddy. That would be terrible. You see? So I want to treat everyone the same. No one in the congregation knows what you give. No one on the session knows what you give. You see, if you were to make a big deal about it, then Jesus would say, well, you're acting like a hypocrite. And the Greek word for hypocrite comes from the word for actor and pretender, one who wants to make big gifts, to make a big show of it all. People who campaign for Volunteer of the Year award, or who are bucking for a vacancy in a stained glass window. Your motivation for giving should be love. Emmett Fox put it beautifully when he said, love never looks for a quid pro quo. There is never giving so that you get a certain thing. Giving is its own reward. And real stewardship is never about giving because of whatever's going on in the church, one way or another. No, stewardship is not about fundraising. It's not about church politics. It's about your individual commitment to Jesus Christ. That's what it's about. Preachers come and go, churches change, but you have a responsibility to God, and that's all stewardship really is. And your responsibility to God, your relationship with God, is going to go your whole life, whatever's going on in the church. So the first point is, we give in order to live, and the second is, we give from the right motive. But then finally, we need to think big when we give, proportionately. For example, your gift, you may say, my gift's not very big, a small gift, I really can't make much difference with it. Guess what? God will do something with your gift. God will multiply it in ways you never imagined. That's the whole feeding of the 5,000 story. Just think about it for a moment. These people are hungry. Jesus preached too long. Their stomachs are grumbling. The disciples are upset. We need to send them packing. He says, no, we need to feed them. And then we don't have enough food. He says, what do you have? 5 loaves, 2 fishes. There's no way we can feed 5,000. Let's do what we can. Now, the summary of that text is, you provide the bread, let God take care of the miracle. See, every time we worry about money, we just need to remember the feeding of the 5,000. You provide the bread, let God take care of the miracle. I remember years ago in another church when we were trying to decide about doing a $3 million capital campaign, and they had never raised more than $1 million. People said, there's no way, we can't possibly do that. We had a big gathering of the congregation, debating, fighting about it, trying to decide, and a matriarch of the church who was nearly 100 made her way up to the communion table and turned around and stared at the congregation. It got very quiet. And she said, we need to do this. I'm giving $20 to get it started. And she put the check on the table. A few months later, we passed the 3 million mark, and I got a call from a young couple, a young woman in the church who joined recently, and she said, we want to give to the capital campaign. Well, that's great, we've already reached our 3 million mark. What are you talking about? She said, could we have lunch with you today? I said, all my lunches are taken all week, and maybe next week what are you talking about? What do you want to do? She said, we want to give 1.5 million. I said, I could have lunch with you today. It will be fine. We can do it. And we sat down together, and the man said, my daddy was a Southern Baptist preacher, and I sold my business for 15 million. This is just a tithe. It's not a big deal. And I said, thank God for the Southern Baptist, which I don't always say. And it was such an amazing event because we then gave $1.5 million away to global missions, all because it started with one woman who said, here's my check for $20. You provide the bread, let God take care of the miracle. God is always going to do more with your gift, no matter how small it is, than you ever imagined. A boy gave a Bible with his name inscribed on the front to foreign missions in India, and it was sent over, and a missionary handed it to a native who had walked miles to get a Bible. And then he headed back. Years later, another missionary came to a small village not far from there where he had heard there had been no missionaries, and was stunned when he began to preach to find out that they knew about Jesus and God. And he finally asked them, how did you know? And they showed him the old worn Bible with the boy's name inscribed on the front. Whatever little gift you give, God's going to multiply it beyond anything you could ever imagine. Now, I know what you all think about preachers. You think we are only interested in money, and we only call you when we want to talk to you about money, and we're just kind of mercenary about it. That story of the man who won the $1 million lottery. His wife was given the notice about it, and she was worried because he has a weak heart. And she said to the preacher, could you please go tell him? And he said, sure. And he went to his place of business. And before he told him, he said, I have a question I want to ask you. He said, yeah. He said, if you won the $1 million lottery, what would you do with it? He said, well, I'd give half to the church, and I'd keep half. And the preacher had a heart attack at that point. Some preachers are just very mercenary. A man comes into the administrative assistant's office and says, I want to talk to the fat hog. She said, who are you referring to? The senior pastor, the fat hog. And she said, we don't refer to our senior pastor as the fat hog. You need to have more respect. And he said, well, okay. And she said, what do you want to tell him? He said, well, I'm going to increase my pledge this year by $50,000. She said, I think the big pig just walked through the door right there. You see, some people think we are only interested in money. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in you beginning to live a full Christian life if you haven't already started. We're interested in helping you breathe, to experience the life-giving love of God and to share it with others. That's what we're interested in. That's what stewardship is all about. Charles Allen tells that when he was a boy, he rode around with his preacher father in a buggy as they collected pledges of their church members, and they drove up to a meager little home of an old school teacher that everybody in the neighborhood called Professor Miller. And he was out there waiting, and he said, hello, Brother Allen. He says, I've got my pledge this year. It's 2 50-cent pieces that my wife and I want to give. And Charles Allen says his father knew how destitute they were. They barely enough to live on. And meaning well, he said, my father said, oh, Professor Miller, don't worry. The church is going to be fine. We really don't need your money. You keep it yourself. And the old school teacher looked at him and said, Brother Allen, are you going to deny me the privilege of giving to my Lord? You see, that's the right attitude. It's not about whatever's going on in the church. It's not about getting glory or recognition. It's about heart-healthy giving. It's about giving from the heart. And you know where he learned that? He learned it from Jesus, who gave his very life that you and I might have life and live it abundantly. So in the end, what you give or don't give, it's not between you and me or you and the stewardship committee. It's between you and the Lord. So when you're thinking about what you're going to do this coming year with your giving or not giving, just have a little conversation with the Lord about that. Because He's the only one who really matters. To Him be all honor and blessing and glory and praise from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all, my friends.